Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online Alicization review. This one's going to be for episode 23, which is called Administrator. And this was an excellent episode. It covered a large part of this sort of middle of the Alicization arc finale. And we saw the death of two characters here in Yugioh as well as the Cardinal. And a lot of big things happening as we completely are here in the finale of this first part of the arc. I think there's two main topics to bring up in this video. The first one is, of course, the events that happened, the death of two important characters, big events happening. And then the second one is about how the anime did about adapting what is probably the most complicated explanation from the light novels up to now into the animation. That being about how the Sword Golem worked and how that led to Yugioh doing what he did. We'll get to that in the second half of the video because I think it was confusing and it takes a couple of readings to fully understand what exactly is going on. But first, we deal with obviously the fact that we have the Sword Golem here. The Cardinal is there. And we realize that, oh, the golem is right back up. How is that possible? What's going on? I thought you were controlling it. And we get the reveal that the sword golem is actually made up of humans. And because of that, it has these connections to the memory fragments of the other Integrity Knights. And that's why they're able to sort of move on their own as this sort of very basic thing driven by desire or love, and that's how it's able to sort of move on its own, but it's basically a monster because it's only one thing that drives it. And so this basically means the Cardinal can't actually kill this thing. It goes against her programming, and that's why she can't ever truly destroy this thing. So she comes up with the only solution that she can in this situation, and that is to sacrifice herself and force Quinella into a deal where she will let Kirito, Alice, and Yugioh get out of this alive. And she's willing to sacrifice herself. And Administrator Quinella agrees to it because of what the Cardinal says. That, like, okay, even if I can't fully win here, I can fight you to my maximum. And no matter how good you are, I will still drain basically half of your remaining kind of life force, that your memory is already struggling because you've had to, you created me basically. Because of this memory limitation, if I fight you enough, I will like half your life. And that's obviously the one thing that truly scares Administrator is, I suppose, her own Fluct Light, something happening to it. And she agrees to this because she doesn't want that to happen. She doesn't want any sort of limitation because that's been the one thing that she's done everything possible to stop from happening. So we get the brutal, tragic, death of the Cardinal here, basically, with her just taking these brutal shots. Really powerful magic from Quinella, and it's just over and over again, and you see Kirito, Alice, and Yugioh just helpless watching this as, it's just this, the character obviously is very powerful, but it's just this young girl just getting thrown around the place, burnt to pieces, and especially the leg kind of getting blown off. It's really, really intense and brutal, knowing that she is, I suppose, as much as Quinella, it represents sort of everything bad with all the vicious experiments, Cardinal knows all the sort of good that humans have to offer, and she's just this sort of kind of pure character, and here she is sacrificing herself for them, and Quinella is just enjoying the kind of pleasure of finally taking out her nemesis. And this is where Yugioh decides that he has to do something, and what we get here, again, I'll come to the explanation about how exactly the Sword Golem and this worked in just a minute. I want to cover the emotional kind of heartbeat of this episode first. And so, because they've mentioned the kind of memory fragments in the ceiling, Yugioh kind of connects with Alice's memory fragment here. So, what we get basically here is that Alice's memory, the person who she cares about the most, whose memory was taken away from her, is Yugioh. Alice Zuberg loved Yugioh. And so that is why this kind of spirit, as we see here, as the way they visually represent it here, has such a connection to Yugioh. And so the connection that happens here is the connection that happens here is the actual love between Yugioh and Alice, because Yugioh now, without the piety module, sort of remembers Alice again, and here is Alice's love for him as well, and they sort of, his idea is to kind of combine them in addition to the Blue Rose Sword into a weapon and do a very similar concept to what the Sword Golem is doing. And Cardinal's last act before she passes on is to transform Yugioh into this crazy shining silver sword that's basically powered by true love and not desire, as Quinella points out with the Sword Golem. And it's really cool because in the same way that the Sword Golem just operates on its own, but it's this kind of construction of a variety of different swords forming this kind of thing, this is just one sword. So one sword just sort of levitates, hovers around the place, and flies around. And obviously it's sort of a difficult one to just animate, just a kind of sword moving on its own. But it's almost like the way the sword is designed, it's almost like a plane just flying around. So it has a cool effect to it, definitely, even though it's not the most visually interesting fight. There's an intensity behind it because it is Yugioh giving his life to help his friends, and especially it coming so relatively soon after him sort of falling and letting himself fall to Quinella, basically, and become an Integrity Knight. It's this true redemption moment, but it's also a very tragic moment because it is the, death of a character with what happens. He eventually, the sword manages to spear the Sword Golem straight through the middle, straight through Yugioh's piety module, and the Sword Golem falls apart, defeated. He then goes to fight Quinella, and in this clash of their swords, both are destroyed. So the sword that is Yugioh is destroyed, as well as Quinella's arm is taken out, as well as her sword. But she manages to just immediately kind of respawn it and fix herself up. But the Sword Golem is taken out. The really brutal thing, though, is that because the sword was broken, the fusion sort of ends, and so it goes back to, I suppose, its original materials. It all falls apart, but because Yugioh was like the main thing connecting it all together, and he was sort of broken, his body reforms kind of, torn in half. So really brutal with the whole leg bit with the Cardinal, and then Yugioh being cut in half. They quickly have the sword, kind of Blue Rose Sword, come to the ground and sort of ice his body sort of like together, so it's at least one piece. So it's not just, someone's like upper half and lower half separated completely, but it's really, really brutal. And obviously Kirito and Alice, for the most part, are sort of helpless in all of this, and especially in the aftermath of this, Cardinal's gone, Yugioh's gone, Quinella is still there, active, and it's just those two left. And Alice had already gotten injured just trying to defend Yugioh as he was being transformed. So Kirito is the only one left with any sort of strength left. And so the end of the episode is Alice about to step in front of the blow that Quinella about to kill Kirito. But he remembers this kind of happening before. People stepping in front of him to sacrifice themselves for him. He remembers Asuna doing it, now Alice is doing it. And it remembers, I suppose, stuff the Cardinal was saying as well. And basically getting across the idea that, like, I suppose, what it is to sort of, like, sacrifice yourself for someone. In that, don't see it as this just complete negative, that they did this for you so you can continue on. Stand, like, because of it and because of what it means. And so this inspires Kirito. His kind of willpower returns, and obviously we know that the swords in this game, of course, are empowered by your spirit, and that's also linked into what like happened before with obviously the power of like desire or love empowering the Sword Golem, as well as the kind of Yugioh fusion sword. Here is Kirito's willpower allowing him to block this blow, and Alice obviously falls to the ground sort of unconscious, and it's left here with Kirito has to fight Quinella one-on-one, how is he going to do this? So plot-wise, I think they covered a lot of ground in this episode. A lot of big things happened, and I thought they were really well done. Now, as for the explanation, I went back and rewatched my review of Volume 14 of the light novel, which this episode is featured in. And I knew going into that review that a part of getting that review right would be that I had to get right in my head the explanation for this as well. Because even reading it in the light novel, it's a complicated explanation for what exactly the sword golem is and what Yugioh ends up doing. And I eventually came up with a good explanation. And I had to go back and rewatch that video to fully understand it, because I don't think the anime did the best job about explaining it. I think the idea came across with just that it's powered by willpower, but if you want to know the specifics, I don't feel they went into it all that much. They were very vague about the whole thing, because they've been a little vague about a lot of the details so far up to now as well. Hence why I think in like previous videos on my channel covering SAO, you've seen some discussions in the comments, especially around concepts like is Alice Zuberg different than Alice Synthesis 30? And my answer is that yes, they are. They are basically different people, despite obviously being the same sort of like base to them. But like it's obviously the question of, you know, are your memories you? If you lost your memories, are you truly you? Because they are your experiences, and they make up who you are. They make up your personality. So that's why Synthesis 30 is so different than Zuberg, because Zuberg has the connection with Yugioh. She is the one who loves Yugioh. Synthesis 30 doesn't know Yugioh beyond just the fact that he's now an ally, that he is Kirito's best friend. She has Synthesis 30 has a closer connection with Kirito than she does with Yugioh, and that's the kind of point that is trying to be made here. And that's part of the explanation here with regards to what they do with the Integrity Knight modules, in that it's made up of 30 swords. The sword golem is made up of 30 swords, and it's made up of basically it's using the fact that there are also crystals, which are the memory fragments of the other Integrity Knights. They didn't make the point yet, but that Alice's module isn't included in it, nor is Yugioh. So it's the other 30 knights. So 1 to 29 plus 31, which is Eldry, skipping over Alice, who is 30. So those are the 30 knights that are included here. Their memories of the person that they care about the most. So in Bercoli's case, it's his wife. In Eldry's case, it is his mother. Those memories which were taken from them to make them Integrity Knights, those memories are put into what is basically, I suppose, this basic framework for a person. And so it just leads to the idea that there is this kind of very basic, with only one emotion, one thing that drives them, clone, basically, in essence, of every one of those Integrity Knights. And they are bonded to one of the swords that makes up the sword golem. There's 30 swords, as I said before. There are 30 crystals. So there you go, 30 sets of sort of sword and owner. The key point that they make here, which is why these swords are able to like act on their own and go through the whole sort of like memory connection with their owner, is that the sword is made up of people. Now, Quinella explains that this is 300, but the significance to, I suppose, the memory fragments that are involved here is that one of the people that makes up their sword is the person who makes up their memory. So in Eldry's case, basically, his sword is made up of his mother. In Bercoli's case, his sword, one of the people that makes up his sword, is his wife. So it gets across the idea of just how cruel it was what Quinella did, that she is weaponizing basically people's love by taking the memories of the person they care about the most, which is bad in of itself, but then purposely finding, taking, and killing, transforming that person into a sword, and then creating this brutal representation of that as part of this like ultimate weapon for herself. And so because that's the only thing that drives them, they immediately have that connection with their sword, because they exist as nothing more than the love for that person. So they immediately have the willpower to do the kind of release recollection kind of command thing, and that's why they act on their own. And they basically just explain that combined, that means that anything that gets in the way of that, their enemies, that's why the golem fights on its own. The difference with what Yugioh does is that obviously it's meant to more represent the real reason behind this, not corrupted way. In that, yes, Alice's module, which isn't included in the sword golem, loves Yugioh. Yugioh loves Alice. That's kind of confirmed. So when he kind of connects to her module, it is the actual love of those two, because the basic way of interpreting this is that, like, what he's connecting to isn't like necessarily like a full person, but it is the part of Alice that did love him. And so in a way, that's like the complete, for Yugioh on his way out here, this sacrifice that he's making. It is this representation of true love, as it's all combined together with the sword into, this shining weapon which acts on its own, except it's not, out of, ultimately working for Quinella. It's of its own free will to do what it wants to do to, I suppose, protect what it means to actually, the actual love that's going on here. So, there's more, I think, meaning behind it if you get the full explanation behind everything that's going on. I'm not going to say the anime did, like, a terrible job at explaining it, but, like, the fact that it hasn't been, like, overly detail-orientated up to now, and they are suddenly required to be a bit more detail-focused, is definitely where it struggled a bit here. Like, I'd love to know how anime-only watchers interpreted the explanation here, especially if they try to go into, wait, how does this work? And if they can actually connect the dots together exactly like I kind of talked about here. Ultimately, it's not the biggest, like, most important point, but as we go forward, it is going to be somewhat important with regards to, like, I suppose, understanding the difference between these people with regards to, like, effectively, this show kind of tends to take the approach of, effectively, like, the Alice is different than Alice Zuberg, and so a person without a good amount of their memories, especially part of their memories that relates to their basically interaction with one whole person, is a different person with and without them. So a lot of those points they probably could have made a little bit better, like they sort of do in the light novel, because it's able to have sort of inner dialogue. Probably the thing that, in a way, was the biggest kind of thing that suffered in this episode was just that what Yugioh making his decision happens extremely quickly, and you have to really connect a lot of dots in your head, whereas in the light novel, you get Yugioh's thought process. You get the character sort of figuring out what's going on here and basically explaining it to you through their kind of inner thoughts on the matter of what's happening. In the anime, you don't have that, and so you are very reliant on what they choose to have in terms of outward dialogue and then visually representing what's going on here. And I think it didn't quite work, but the idea is gotten across, I think, relatively well, of just, here's this golem, here's a basic explanation of the golem. Yugioh is doing that, but in a more pure, kind of good form, and the result ultimately is that we've gotten rid of this bad representation of that, and I suppose the true, complete abuse of Quinella, of the love of all the integrity knights, basically. But it caused Yugioh to have to sacrifice himself in the same moment. Cardinal's gone, and we're left with Alice unconscious, and it's Kirito versus Administrator. So I'm very excited for the next episode, to see just how in-depth we go. Is next week going to be the end of the arc, or are we going to go 25 and 26? I'm not entirely sure, but next episode's called My Hero, which is very interesting. I think we're going to get some very, very emotional moments here, for sure. So I'm super excited for next week. This week was very, very well done, but I wanted to go in depth on that explanation just because I even struggled with it a little bit in the light novel, and then here I was really looking out for how good the explanation was, and I don't think they quite got it right. Now, part of that I think was also the fact that this, obviously watching it in sub rather than the dub, which is nowhere near this episode at this point in time, that you have to sort of, I felt like I had to pause basically those scenes, because like it's easy enough to like follow along the subtitles when it's just the basic dialogue, here's the basic plot, but then they're suddenly going into like, okay, memory fragment is up here and making this connection, and like this one line of dialogue that is on screen for like 2-3 seconds maybe, you need to really take in what it's saying to get the explanation, and so you have to kind of pause, go back through it a few times. It was the same with the book. I had to read that passage a few times to fully get it. But it's not as complicated as you think. It's just hard to kind of piece it all together exactly. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode, as well as what I had to say about it. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.